Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 silent relics. Today, I'm your host, Phil, and with me as always, we've got Davey. How you doing, Davey?
Doing great. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. And with us today as well, we've got a special guest. We got Zach, goes by Requisen on the Vassal Discord, if you're familiar with those parts, and also runs the it's Cozy Serpent Gaming YouTube channel, I believe.
Yeah, it's a new YouTube channel, only a couple videos out, but dipping my toes into the world of content creation, so it's been exciting.
Awesome. Well, we can jump back to that a little bit, I guess, if you want to talk more about it. But before we get to our regular community shoutouts, just to let you know, the topic for today, if you couldn't have guessed from our under 30, we're talking the Silent Menace card pack. Sort of a new thing that Games Workshop is trying here. This is being billed as a deck in a box, something that you can play right out of the box. So as we run through the cards, we can keep that in mind. And a special shout out to Games Workshop. Just they get us some early review copies, and we just want to say thanks. That's always greatly appreciated. Having the stuff in hand to look at ahead of time to do this type of review is always very nice. All right, so community shoutouts. So as we mentioned, got the Cozy Serpent Gaming. Talk about that a little bit. But before we circle back there, Davey, do you have any community shoutouts that you would like to call out?
I think we're going to do it right here. There's a couple of new content things we talked to, or I should say, I talked to Benji from Tabletop Sydney. That actually is released mere minutes before we sat down to record this. So, this. We just wanted to talk to Zach a little bit about his channel. I hope he does more with it. I watched the Underworld's Bat Rep you have on there. Really liked it. If I were to summarize it, looks like it's a battle report in just 15 minutes. I think it takes even less than that, and you kind of recreate a game that you already played. Video it out, talk through the moves, show the cards. There's a ton of information in a very small time. Short amount of time, and I found it really engaging because you talked about some of the thought process and how you got there. So since we got you here, you want to talk a little bit about how you came to trying that format out and what your goals are with it?
Yeah, I mean, the desire I think everyone has is to record games they're playing in person, but COVID, so not really much of that going on right now. But I thanks to Vassal's logging system, I've had a couple really good games that I have recorded the logs of and wanted to try to recreate just to do some analysis. I feel like there's a lot of videos out there, great videos. Like you said, Benji from Tabletop Sydney has done a lot that are like, real time. You get the banter between the players. You get to like hear their thought process in real time, but there's not as many out there that are like from one person's perspective, seeing their hand, going through their thought process as to why they've made the decisions they do make. So I kind of wanted to try that. And hopefully people liked it. I want to do more like that. I have a lot of respect for people who put out YouTube videos every day because it took me like a week to edit that one down and put all this stuff in. So I'm kind of learning that as I go along.
Yeah, that was one of the thoughts I had when I was looking. I'm like, this is great. I'm getting through this like really quick and getting a lot out of it in a short amount of time. This seems like it's probably a ton of work, to recreate it all and edit it all together. And I don't do any video stuff, so I was just gut instinct on it. But I hope you find it to be a sustainable thing, even a once in a while thing. It's fun, and I like the idea of highlighting a particularly good game or whatever. So, noteworthy game, I suppose.
Hopefully, have more of those as time goes on, new releases and stuff.
Sure, we'll keep our eye out when we see them. We'll pop it here. So,
and I mean, it's nice. I think it's probably the only short form bat rep that I've seen for this game. And so sometimes there's just not enough time to sit down and watch an hour-long video of a real-time game.
Mhm.
But being able to get just the highlights and see all the moves, but have it all compressed down, I really like that. So looking forward to seeing more of it.
Glad to hear it. Thanks, guys.
Sure.
All right. So now we have our other recurring segment called What the Hex is Going On With You? And since you are our guest, we'll start with you, Zach. What the hex is going on with you in the hobby?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I just finished up my Crimson Court. That is 26 warbands down for me. I went into lockdown with
Holy Moses.
I went into lockdown with 6 teams painted, and I've just been trying to burn through them as much as possible and get caught up. But yeah, next on the table is Storm of Solstice for me. I collecting a whole Stormcast army for AOS, so I got that color scheme down pretty pat. So that should go relatively quickly, and then on to whatever's next.
What storm host are you in Age of Sigmar?
Oh, I'm Anvils of the Helden Hammer,
Oh, nice.
black and gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good look.
And then as far as decks go, I've been messing around with some Crimson Court control decks. I'm not sure how fun it'll be to play against, seeing as you just kind of like stand around and get hunger tokens and score for having hunger tokens and then get more hunger tokens. But it does seem pretty consistent, so I want to try that out sometime.
That's cool.
Solid.
If there was ever a time where it can, there's so many speed boosts and stuff that at least it likely is not gonna feel quite like the relic Stormcast that would be at the back and like just never engage. It's hard to never engage in this current meta right now.
You don't miss Stormcast sitting on the back of the table and then playing Great Concussion to push everybody apart
great
from
concussion,
each
so brutal. Yeah.
Rip to that card.
Good old days.
Awesome. I have been recording and editing podcasts a bunch, but I did finally finish my Chosen Axes.
Nice.
So ready for them to just take the table by storm. And then I've been in a league, and I've been trying a bunch of different stuff out. I've been trying different decks. We talked about it last time where I tried Tommy's deck and realized that I need a lot more reps to be able to come anywhere near the skill cap of that one. But enjoyed it, and it was almost I'm not my opponents played well. I'm not taking anything from them. But it was fun to kind of like, I don't know, almost give yourself permission to like lose games, like risk put more at risk, instead of being like, okay, I'm only going to take top tier stuff or only stuff that I'm really comfortable with. Like, let's go into this environment where people be pushing it a little bit harder than they would in just a pure pickup game. And it was fun to, I don't know, it felt real comfortable to do that. So it was felt like I got a lot out of them, and hopefully I'll have a chance to share some of that down the line with some of the stuff we're working on. So yeah, speaking of building decks, what if someone was already pre-building one for you?
Yeah, well, that might be super handy. But before we jump into there, I guess I will say what I've been working on.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much the same as what I've always been working on for the last few episodes, and it's still working on the Starblood Stalkers. So they're all base coated. I'm almost completely done with Clacktrock at this point. I was hoping to finish him before we recorded today, but no such luck. But yeah, having a lot of fun with that. Almost done with them. Plan to get those pictures posted somewhere for podcast viewer consumption at some point. I guess that'd be listener, not viewer in this case. But then also going to be doing another hobby project coming up here soon. Be something to keep an eye out for the just story phase from the Mortal Realms. And nice. Then also been working on a deck for the Mad Mob, just because new kids on the block, and I really am intrigued by their ability to mess around with primacy. So I tried to build a deck that focused entirely on getting and giving and messing around with the primacy token. So looking forward to trying that.
Well, I don't want to call you out here, but my jealousy dictates that I must point out that you did get to play in person this past week.
I
So,
did
yeah.
get to do that as well. That was a big deal. First game in person since lockdown started, so over a year, and it felt really good, even though rolled into a situation where my opponent had not prepared a deck ahead of time and just played straight out of the box. And
Oh,
so it was not a like well balanced game, but it was still fun. But yeah, so this, speaking of decks, as you mentioned, this deck in a box. So we'll run down as we usually do. We'll run down the objectives, gambits, and upgrades. But then I think because this is sort of sold with this idea of being like, hey, this is a deck, you can just play it as built, and supposedly that's going to work. So I think we can sort of judge at the end, does that actually hold up, and like how good of a deck would it be? Does it actually make sense? How would you maybe try to use that? So yeah, some objectives. And again, I've been running stats on all of these because I just find it interesting. So especially this time, because it's not just like, here's a assortment of cards you can use. This is supposedly going to be a deck that you would play. So there's only 5 surges, which you'd think if it was going to be a standard competitive deck, you'd go 6 just because you are allowed 6. And then it does have 6 regular end phase and 1 third end phase. Of those, there's 1 2 glory end phase card and 1 2 glory surge. And then there are 2 new dual and hybrid objectives. So you do get a good mix of stuff. But yeah, let's talk about those cards. I guess, where would you like to start, Davey?
I mean, we can go with the one that's got my boys on there, the Reavers. There's Advancing Swarm. It's an end phase. Score this in an end phase if the 3 or more friendly fighters have 1 or more charge tokens. So this it's interesting they got Reavers for this because they have a surge, which is when your third person is charged. This is actually because it's an end phase and because you have to have your fighters alive. This is actually harder for them to score. It's not all that great for them because often at least one of the people who have charged have died. Targor or whoever you've sent in. So it's,
and for those guys, you kind of want one of them to die anyway for your inspiration
exactly.
condition. So yeah.
But this doesn't specify that they have to have made the charge. It just have to have a charge token. So if you're doing bag of tricks kind of things, like you can work it that way. So this feels like something that's maybe more along the lines of the Wild Hunt is cool with that. Maybe even like Thundrix, who can get those charges because of their range and such. So not blowing me away, but it's there, and I think there's a few decks that may look at it, but it's that sort of one glory end phase. So not lighting the world on fire, but you may find yourself looking at it for when you're filling that 5th or 6th.
To me, it really
spot.
feels more like a tough aggro card, like Crimson Core to Magor, somebody with 4 wounds, because then you can do 4 charges, and you're not going to lose 2.
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
Yeah.
So it's better for that than it is for someone like, unlike the artwork, sadly, not really great for Garrett.
Yeah. What do you got, Zach? You got one you want
to? I want to talk about Demolish the Opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So this is a new 3rd end phase card. This is hybrid. So 3rd end phase. Score this if there are no enemy fighters in enemy territory, or there's no more than 1 surviving enemy fighter. I think this is a bad card, but I think it's a really interesting card. Because this is like almost an anti-aggro card. Like a lot of aggro decks are just they're running across the board, right? ADCs, they're charging across, they're getting in your territory. This is, and they're, occasionally they're rolling conquest to get that 2 glory at the end. I mean, not as much anymore, but in the past they have been. And they sometimes put it back in when rotation, there's less cards and stuff. So this is kind of like an anti-conquest where it's like, oh, you've gotten in here, you've done your attacks, you've kind of come to me and gotten your glory, and now I'm going to get this big spike third, your 3 glory card.
Yeah.
I don't think it's consistent enough because you want those third end phase cards to be like, yeah, I'm going to score this every single game when it's, when I don't draw it in my opening hand. But like the idea is very cool, and I like the design on it, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting one.
I think it's specifically obnoxious to Rippas in a lot of ways, who often are doing bold deeds or cruel hunters sort of thing. So they're trying to get, or maybe they have the surge for hunter killing somebody in enemy territory. I'm blanking on it right now, but
Brought to Bay,
Brought to Bay is the one.
Yeah, or even just Show of Force, getting that off the 3 in enemy territory. Side of it.
But again, that's one more band, and like you said, not consistent. But yeah.
I almost wonder, especially with the card art, if they intended for this to be sort of like, it's a somewhat easier like annihilation, but then they like accidentally wrote a card that's actually defensive, not offensive.
Because it is a hybrid, right? And there's that second half to it, but I don't know how often you're going to be tabling your opponent or leaving them with 1 left. Like that's super matchup dependent.
Yeah.
And if you go into the wrong warband, you're just never going to score it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, that was one of the hybrids. You want to hit the other hybrid there, Phil?
Yeah. So this other one is Martial Adept. This is a hybrid in the end phase. For 1 glory, if you have 1 or more friendly fighters that has 2 or more attack action upgrades, or 1 or more friendly fighters that has 3 or more upgrades. So this is actually similar to a lot of the other things that we've seen so far this season, that's rewarding you for putting all your upgrades onto 1 fighter, or a lot of upgrades on 1 fighter. In fact, I think this is almost identical to Bristling with Weapons. So
Bristling has the caveat that you need to have, I think it has to be a hunter with them. So this is a little more flexible.
Right.
I think this has got play in certain decks like that. It's not big, but it's a thing that will just happen for you at times. And then it has a nice side benefit is if you happen to be one of those people running a combo deck, then
I think there's some interesting play with like combo Skaven where you just keep bringing back that 1 rat with combo. I mean, I know we saw it a little bit near the end of Beastgrave, but they keep printing cards that works for it. So maybe it comes back. Maybe we see it again.
Yeah. Maybe eventually we'll have enough stuff to make combo worth it, and then
we'll
hit rotation. But yeah, I would say that this is solid. I mean, if you're running anything that you want to be stacking upgrades, then yeah, why not? Might as well. Where do you want to go next, Davey? We just finished the hybrids. Do you want to go to the duels?
Sure. Well, actually, there's kind of a little family of cards here. One of them is a duel, but there's a Forbidding Strike, Killing Strike, and Stinging Strike.
Ooh, okay.
And so they're using the strike to signal that it's something that has to happen in your first activation. So not the first activation. If you go second in a round, you can still do these things, which you may want to do with these because then you'll have a chance to score them with the help of some power cards laid down, as opposed to doing it just totally with what you got on the board there. But Forbidding Strike is the duel. It's immediately after an activation in which a friendly fighter's attack action took an enemy fighter out of action if it was the first activation in this round and they were on an objective. So that's 2. But there's a very tight window and the very specific situation where they have to be on an objective. Killing Strike is similar, only there's not the positioning requirement, so have to take somebody out with an attack action, and it has to be your first activation. And then Stinging Strike is you you just have to be successful with a range 3+ attack action with your first activation. So all three, I think they're the big question you're going to ask yourself is having this limited window going to kill it for you? Because if you draw into it later in the round, it's no good. You're only going to have 3 points in the entire game where you could ever score this. I think it's maybe the lot of them are just maybe too restrictive. There's too many ways they can gum up the works. I don't know. Do you guys have a different take?
I mean, I agree. Like you said, only having 3 windows, like if you surge into it, it's bad. Stinging Strike, I play a lot of Profiteers. So I saw this and I'm like, ooh, yeah, just a successful attack action. Totally cool. I can score this alongside Bold Conquest or, Hidden Purpose or any other thing that I'm trying to move and shoot and do stuff. But yeah, like you said, you draw into it and it's dead. And if you draw into it in the third end, like if it's at the bottom of your deck in the third round, you literally can't do anything with it. I like the idea here again, especially like Forbidding Strike, because 2 glory on a surge is very cool. And it's like a very specific window. So it's not like temporary victory where it's too easy of a 2 glory surge. But it probably just doesn't see play.
Yeah, I mean,
on that window.
Situationally, it feels nuts, right? Because you could get a 2 glory surge for killing, I don't know, like a random ghoul who went to stand on an objective.
Yeah, or even if you go second, you like distraction onto an objective and then charge them or something.
Sure, yeah,
Yep.
But yeah, I think just not smooth enough. I think it's going to go with the works too many times. There's one of your duels though, Phil. You want to hit the other?
Yeah. So then this is the other 2 glory card that we've got here, and this is the end phase one. And this one's a doozy. You've got to have 4 or more surviving friendly fighters that have 1 or more charge tokens, and no friendly fighters taken out of action in this round.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Well, and so as I was brainstorming, you think about a card and you step away from the screen or whatever, and you're thinking about it, and then you lose some of the details of it. I was like, oh, like maybe it works with a warband where you can resurrect, but that was wrong for a couple of reasons, because you're going to resurrect without your charge token. And this says this is was not taken out of action, is not out of action. So yeah, they picture Skaven on that card.
Yeah,
seems
that's not
unlikely.
not the warband that's going to do it. But man, I don't know which. This might be your bulky aggro that you were talking about, Zach.
Yeah.
It does tie in a little bit with Advancing Swarm, right? Because it's an end phase for having X number of charge tokens. I don't know if you would run both. The idea is interesting, and like you said before, Profiteers in particular can charge and shoot, stay out of harm's way. Profiteers in particular are pretty tanky. You've got 5 wound, 4 wound, 4 wound. So it's not like you're going to die very easily, but man, it's a hard condition for 2 glory.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I was like looking through the power cards that can give you charge tokens. Like, you mentioned Bag of Tricks. Very cool. There's like a Go to Ground is the one where you can teleport back into your territory and give them a charge token. But like, none of these are solid enough where it's like I would play them if I wasn't running these cards. So is it worth including them to score a 2 glory end phase?
Right.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think maybe it's worth mentioning here, but so we've already seen 2 cards in this set where there's a very hard requirement for the number of fighters that you're going to be using. And so if you were to try and run all these cards as a deck, you definitely wouldn't want to use them with any of the elite warbands with only 3 fighters, because then this is entirely unscorable from first activation.
Even a relatively squishy 4 like Purifiers or Dread Pageant even, because you're going to lose Hadzu every
Yeah,
single
Hadzu's
game.
really going to drag you down.
That's unfortunate. Yeah. So yeah. So that was Untouchable Swarm. So that runs us through all the hybrids and all the duels. Where would you like to go next, Zach?
Good question. I'd like to talk about Promise of Destruction, because I
Mm.
think this is like when I was going through and giving these my personal ratings, I actually rated this like really highly, and it's kind of niche, right? Because so this is end phase. Score this in an end phase if there are one or more persisting gambits.
Hmm.
Um, and at first glance, you're like, oh, that's pretty niche. It's not great, but you know, Outrun Death is in a lot of decks, and it's going to
Yeah.
be in more decks once Spectral Wings rotates out, which is kind of
Yep.
like the better version, but that's going to go away. You know, certain warbands have a lot of persisting effects. The asterisms for
Starblood
Starblood.
Stalkers.
Starblood Stalkers, thank you. I was thinking Seraphon couldn't get it out. Yeah, the asterisms are persisting effects. The cycles are persisting effects. There's like a reasonable number of them out there. Or even a couple spells if you're playing Magic Heavy's Curse Breakers. I don't know if that's viable anymore, but you know, it's there.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like 90% of the time, this is kind of like, it's a mediocre card. But if you are running a deck where you've got Outrun Death, where you've got these gambits, where you've got a couple other things, you know, this might just be a free score. You might just score this every single time it's in your hand, which is kind of tempting. And, you know, as we go into season 5 and see what they print, or at least, you know, get these last two warbands out of Dire Chasm, I think we'll see more persisting effects because they seem to be liking that direction.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be more and more consistent as time goes on.
Yeah. I echo a lot of what you're thinking there. I did not go through and look at all the existing persisting stuff. I kind of went through some of the stuff off the top of my head, but it feels like this is a card that's going to go into some of these, maybe a control build or something where you want the really reliable glory for low risk. And this you can get for drawing and then playing cards, and guarantee your glory without having to put yourself in harm's way, even in a lot of cases. And some of those persisting gambits also play into the control style where you're locking someone down or reducing their offensive output or something like that.
Yeah, +1 defense, -1 attack dice. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of great cards out there for specific warbands.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's the one is very, very different here, but Orchestrated Kill. So this is a surge. Score immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action. That takes enemy fighter out of action if the fighter had one or more supporting fighters. I think there's that, and then above it, Impending Doom. Score this immediately after an activation if one or more enemy fighters are adjacent to two or more friendly fighters. Those look like they're paired up pretty well, and they may be. But I think you'll frequently see decks take one and not the other, depending on what kind they are. But these specifically bring up a theme that we'll see throughout the deck, with the idea of supporting fighters. This sort of swarm idea, the silent people being some sort of insectoid race that has been interrupted in their cocoons, so they're partially formed or some such. But Orchestrated Kill with some of these decks. I've played against combat goblins that would score this on me multiple times. So from the receiving end of things, like, this feels very doable. I think sometimes a card like this that feels like someone would score it on you a lot when you actually have it in your own hand, it looks a little harder. And then the Impending Doom, that feels, they've got ghosts on there. They do have the banshees on there, but that feels like there was those hug Thorns of the Briar Queen.
Yeah.
That feels doable. That's a surge without rolling dice, which is always something that should make you sit up and pay attention.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Thorns had this card, except it was 3 friendly fighters adjacent to one or more enemy fighters. And they played it because Varklav Bush, very good. And you're playing like Center of Attention and stuff as well. Speaking of ghosts, you can also score this pretty reliably with Wraith Creepers, just getting that drum in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The drum's so powerful.
Yeah, and they like that orchestrated kill too. So maybe they like both of them
True.
because
Yeah.
they have another. They have one that's a surge just for making an attack that as a supporting fighter,
Hmm.
and set it up right.
Worth noting. I mean, we're talk about it in a bit, but there is a ploy that plays very well into orchestrated kill, where you get some free supports. So I think they did design that in mind a little bit, which is kind of nice. They have that little bit of synergy within the deck, but we'll
Yeah.
talk about that when we get to the ploys.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that's just worth mentioning in general, in that it says, make a successful attack action while you have one or more supporting fighters, but you could have that off of upgrades that make you count as having, or if you've played a ploy that makes you count as having a supporting fighter. So if you have that kind of stuff like Rippas,
Hmm.
that can also make this a nice, easy one. Just go make an attack, and with your boosted accuracy, hopefully you're going to hit.
Yeah. Well, it's Rippas, so the wolf bite will hit. You'll be all right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wolf bite crits every single time.
Invariably.
Yeah. We're just down to 2, right? We got
Yep.
brutal attrition and cold-blooded killers. Somebody wants to.
Correct. Yeah. So I guess we've seen a lot of faction cards that are very similar to brutal attrition. So it's an end phase where you score it if the number of enemy fighters out of action is equal to or greater than the number of surviving friendly fighters. And I guess the faction card we keep seeing printed over and over again is that there's like more enemy fighters out of action than enemy fighters alive, but it's sort of the same idea, right? Where it's like you're trying to have more of one, more of certain fighters out of action than in action, which I guess if you're going for like a really bloody aggro style of play, this isn't terrible.
Funnily enough, I think this has like counter synergy with Advancing Swarm and Untouchable Swarm.
Right.
As you said, those are terrible on elite warbands, but this is actually better on elite warbands, because if you got 3 dudes and you're against a 5-wound warband, you just go kill, 2-3 dudes, maybe lose 1 in the process. You're already well on your way to this.
Yeah.
But then you can't score Untouchable Swarm at all. So it's kind of like, where's the trade off there?
Yeah.
I look at this and I just think Reavers, but like we talked about, Reavers don't necessarily work with some of this other stuff, but
True.
Yeah.
Glory for having my guys dead.
I'm embarrassed to say I had to read this a couple times to actually, and then I didn't actually write it down, but I had to think about it. Like, wait, hold on. What is the end state here that I'm looking for?
I think it's like you said, this is very similar, but not the same as a lot of faction cards that are about enemy fighters only, or like enemy dead versus you're alive or something like that. And so it's like we have a lot of different cards with very similar wording, but slightly different. And I'm betting it's going to confuse some people when they go to build.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you score that. I mean, you mentioned Reavers. I think you score this a lot in Reavers just because you kill a lot and lose a lot. So I'm very often down to just 1 or 2 by the end of the second round, or certainly in the third round. And hopefully on the way you've done some killing. If you haven't, then you're probably losing this one and losing the game anyway. But maybe. So just 1 left, and this is Cold-Blooded Killers. Score 1 glory in the end phase if 2 or more enemy fighters are out of action. 1 glory is not a lot, and there's certain warbands where taking 2 out is a real tall order, and others where not so much. This more or less directly competes with things like bold deeds and clean kills, which have a better payoff for slightly more restrictions, but I think you can play towards those. I don't know what you guys think.
I would definitely agree. I mean, 2 kills in some matchups is most of the enemy warband dead, and a 1 glory payout isn't huge. So I think more often than not, this card is going to be passed for other options.
Yeah, there's metas where this is good. I mean, if this card was out at the beginning of Beastgrave, where it was like Grimwatch and Thorns, and everyone's playing Temporary Victory. I mean, you score this every single game. But
sure.
But now, like, okay, maybe you kill 2 of Mollog's mooks and score this, but are you really going to do that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and we of course we talk about these cards as if it's the global monolithic meta, but you're
right.
you're local. You may be one
Into a lot of
person.
gits or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it may be all goblins and ghosts and ghouls as far as the eye can see, in which case, have at it.
Yeah. And I guess to think like how does this work in this set of cards? It kind of has synergy in that a lot of these other cards are pushing you towards getting kills. So
Hmm.
if through the course of the game you can manage to get 2 kills, you'll get this. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if your opening hand is Advancing Swarm, Cold-Blooded Killers, and Untouchable Swarm, you just make 4 charges. Yeah, man.
yeah,
I mean, you can do it. That's
roll
Yeah.
the
great.
dice and hope you got it. So that's all of the objectives. Um, I guess I generally say like they work, but like we've talked about, there's some odd choices here. You'd really have to know which warband you want to use this with if you were going to try and run it straight out of the box.
Weirdly enough, like, even though we've talked about how a lot of these interact with aggro, I think the best ones out of here are like the flex control ones.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Martial Adept, Promise of Destruction, you don't need kills for. Impending Doom and Orchestrated Kill, like we said, like, these don't require successful attacks. You just need to surround people. You can do that with a flex gits build or like a flex ghost build. So yeah, just an interesting little note about the intended design versus probably what's going to see play.
Right. For
very
sure.
much so. All right, so quick stats. There's not a whole lot to say about the gambits before we dive in, but there are 2 reactions in here. So if you're
Hmm.
one of the warbands that can score off of reactions, there you go. And as they stated when they released this, there are no spells. The intent is that any warband can run all of these cards and never have anything that is unusable. Zach, where would you like to start for the gambits?
Oh, I want to start right at the beginning. Acidic Strike. So this
Yeah.
is reaction. Play after a successful attack action. Pick one of the target's upgrades and discard it. I think this is broken potentially. I mean, I don't like to be hyperbolic, especially when new stuff comes out. But like, we've seen discard enemy upgrades in the past. Notably, Banshees have 2. I think they have at least one upgrade that doesn't. I think they have a oh no, they have a power card that forces your opponent to discard a power card to resolve one of theirs.
Yep.
So we've seen like enemy discard, enemy destroy in the past a little bit, but it's always come at a price. There was, I think there was one in Arena Mortis where you had to discard one of yours to make your opponent destroy one of their upgrades, something like that.
Yeah,
you didn't see a lot of play.
There's a shattering howl when you lose somebody. You can react to bust an upgrade off them.
Yeah. So, but they're always like that, right? Where it's like you need to die, you need to kill somebody, you need to, perform this sort of thing. But this is just successful attack action, no range restriction, no supporting fighter restriction or positional restriction. It is just you can have your range 3 sword 1 damage dude shoot a plink and take off a Great Fortitude. Like, that's really powerful. And especially with something like Great Fortitude, people are stacking all these defensive upgrades where your 3 damage attack effectively becomes a 4 damage attack because you took off a +1 wound.
Yeah. I mean, there's some corner case situations where, if they've got Great Fortitude and Deserved Confidence and something else, you plink the Great Fortitude and then Deserved Confidence drops down to 2. All of a sudden it was an effective 2. I know that's corner, but
yeah, but those sort of things will happen, especially with how things are stacking. Or like your opponent is going for Avatar of the Urgrub and you kill Sting of the Urgrub.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do now? It's I think this is like an insanely powerful card, especially in this Voltron meta we're living in. In the future, maybe not so much. If you're in a hold objective matchup, maybe you kill Cryptic Companion with it, maybe, or like a Quarry upgrade so they can't score Absolute Stillness, maybe. But in the current meta, I think it's like you'll see this in a lot of decks, and it will surprise people, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really good as well. But I'm really happy that it exists, and I think it's a really good thing. Just because control, I think, has always been at the sort of periphery of the game, and we've always talked about control as like a thing, but there's never really been enough tools for control to be a true play style like it is in something like Magic.
Mm-hmm. Control tends to end up something like passive play, and the kind of interactive, defensive, disruptive control hasn't really seen a whole lot of interest, and I
Right.
think that's because the design hasn't been there.
Yeah, well, and you think about a card like this. So usually when you're building your power deck, your gambits and your upgrades, you're saying, I'm taking this one because it's helping me score this objective or it's helping me
Mm.
do this thing. Acidic Strike on its face, like there's nothing there's not an objective for like Surge if you remove somebody's upgrade, or score this in the end phase if there's at least one fighter that doesn't have any upgrades on the whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
This is purely disruptive. It doesn't, so you don't look at it and say, yeah, this unlocks this thing that I want to do with my fighters.
Yeah, but notably, it does stop your opponent from scoring things. Like it can
Exactly.
stop Show
Right.
of Force. It can stop, the one we just talked about, Martial Adept. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of situations where this is going to, or like I said, Avatar, or Lost Page. I'm like, imagine killing the Lost Tome and they have 3 other pages on there. They just feel awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
This,
because you get to pick as well,
Yes,
rather than it being
that's
random
huge.
narrowing passages out there as well. But that has some limitations as far as needing to be on a quarry or your opponent picks, and then it's a random upgrade.
Mhm.
So you can be targeted with it.
Yeah.
yeah. So very, very good. I hope that we continue to see more control type things. Not exactly this. I don't think we need more than 2 power cards that can kill upgrades.
Hmm.
Yeah. Where should we go next, Davey?
Let's hit your other reaction here.
Yeah.
That would be the very next one. It's a Hidden Sting. Play this after friendly fighters successful range 1 attack action. If there are 1 or more crits in the attack roll, deal 1 damage to the target. Maybe if you have a high dice range 1 warband, right? That's pretty restrictive. So, and then you could just hold it if you don't see the crit. But and there's I'm gonna blank on. I think there's this card exists in some of the other warbands as well. I think Cabras have something like this. It's not restricted to range 1, and even that feels a little borderline. But
I think those are usually upgrades or like a ploy you play first and be like, if there's a crit, it does extra stuff. This is a reaction. I think being a reaction makes it kind of nice because it's kind of twist the knife, right? Or pit trap or trap. But you need a crit and it has to be range 1, so it's more restrictive. So I had it played against me by a Crimson Court player, and they're running a lot of 2 of their fighters are 3 hammer and 3 sword. They've got +1 dice effects, so it's like,
Yeah.
it's probably fine, but you're right. I mean, if you're just chucking 2 hammers every time, it's not extremely reliable.
sure.
Yeah. I think this definitely feels like something where they said, we like the space the twist the knife occupied, but it was too good. So let's start to tinker with it and try and find a way that we can reintroduce that card without actually reprinting that card. And so I think we're going to see stuff like this. And then if this isn't good enough, then there'll probably be something else, and it'll sort of be like, keep edging our way back to where they want it to be. I don't know, but that's how it feels to me anyway. All right, so we did all the reactions. I guess we'll go here because we were talking about some of the other stuff that works with the supporting fighters. I think so. There's 2 here that I am remembering that relate to having supporting fighters, and I think the one that you alluded to earlier, Zach, is Swarming Strike. So this is a ploy where the first friendly fighter to make an attack action in the next activation is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter. Situationally, this could be really huge, and like we mentioned earlier, this allows you to score things like Orchestrated Kill without actually having a supporting fighter. I think this is I guess the only like downside to playing something like this, if you're not trying to score off of having supporting fighters, is that I think adding a support is almost the same accuracy boost as adding 1 dice. and there's plenty of ploys that also just add 1 dice. So
Yeah, especially with determined effort in the essentials pack.
yep.
I think +1 dice is statistically slightly better, but there's fewer cards that score off of it, like you said. I mean, there's the 2 in this, or there's the 1 in this one, and I'm sure there's faction specific cards I'm not thinking of right now.
Yeah, it's situational. So if you're 3 fury into 1 dodge, the support is better than adding 1 more dice because you're already so high there. But yeah, you're right. There's here's a question for you, because this is, to me, is worded a little bit awkwardly. Your instinct on a card like this is that it's going to work for the first attack action, but it says the first friendly fighter to make an attack action in the next activation is considered to have 1 additional supporting fighter. It doesn't say for how long, so I assume it's just for that attack, but I wonder if you were making a scything attack. You know what I mean?
think this works on scything.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's only for the next act. But yeah, so that's kind of cool if you're trying to leverage some scything attacks. If you have Mighty Swing in there, then this gets especially since there you're going to be working against opposing supports.
Oftentimes, when you're doing scything, you really, if you have that first attack thing, like determined effort or something, you really only care about the 1 attack, so you use that one first, and then you kind of scything in and don't care about those attacks, or something like that. So this is probably better for scything, but the question is, does it really warrant a slot over something like that just for that specific purpose?
Yeah,
definitely.
This other one that was talking about support, Strength of the Swarm, which gets a special shout out for having the always great ghoul quotes on there.
Yeah.
But +1 dice to the next attack action made by a friendly fighter that has 1 or more supporting fighters. In addition, +1 damage if you have 2 or more supporting fighters. And then this does persist until after the next attack action made by a friendly fighter. So this does, there's a couple that we've seen like this that have an effect that are waiting on you to make the next, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not restricted to the next activation. So if somebody tries to ice you out, in the old days, it would be something like invisible walls. Say, just kidding, you're not going to attack this next time. Or here, maybe, they throw down one of the faction specific things like insensate. I'm only going to take 1 damage, and you can sit on this for a second, which is corner
nice,
case, but it's something. This is pretty restrictive. It's going to be tough to get the double. Not too bad to get the single, but even that is more work than just the 1 dice. So I think for the setup here, it probably doesn't find its way into most decks unless you really have some way of getting innate supports, or you're really leaning into that whole setup.
For sure.
It
does not have a range restriction though, so that
helps.
That's something.
Yeah, I do want to. I'll give some internet karma to the first person who plays this and punching up, and then just rocks up with a damage 4 Soul Tooth Spear Git or something like that.
Yep. Scurry some Gits in there and just go to town blowing somebody up with +2 dice, +2 damage.
It'd be hilarious.
All right. Reach for the stars. We hit those. Zach, I want to throw one at you, Zach. What do you think of specifically, we'll say, swarming advance here? I think that's a pretty juicy one worth talking about.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. Again, I think they've learned a lot from previous designs. I talked about this a bit with Hidden Sting, where it's like Twist the Knife, but more balanced and better. This is it's a little bit like 2 Steps Forward. But whereas with 2 Steps Forward, the downside was your opponent also got to push, which wasn't much of a downside a lot of the time. This has more of a restriction where you have to have somebody in enemy territory. So you can't use it to auto score Hidden Purpose or Temporary Victory. You kind of have to use it in a slightly aggressive fashion. You've got to chuck somebody up the field, and then you can only push towards them. So I feel like this is going to end up being more of a aggro card,
Hmm.
but only for specific warbands, right? You're not going to run this in Mollog. You're probably going to run this in Crushes. You're
Right.
not going to run
Oh,
this in somebody who's like a move 5 warband probably doesn't need this, but
Hmm.
Crushes move 3, you're going to want this. It shows Fire Slayers on there. Yeah, maybe you can use it to get onto an objective or just into charge range with your stunty move 2.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it feels like a nice balanced aggro push that does require some setup to use, and I really really like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's got some skill to use, and I think if you can set it up right, it's pretty powerful. And that sounds like a well designed card to me.
For sure. Um, I really like also that you can't really play this in the early parts of the game. You'd have to, you know, you have to take a risk first. Uh, whereas like there's a lot of in-faction cards that are pushed multiple fighters, and sometimes you
Mhm.
use those sort of as your setup, and then you go in. So there's like no risk to getting closer to set up the charges.
You can use it as setup later on, though. Like
True.
round 2, things are kind of like in a brawl. Everyone's 1 hex away from being pushed or knocked back or whatever.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now you've got this big scrum in the middle, and you just play this, get 2 supporting fighters, and charge in. Like
Yeah.
there's some
Yeah.
interesting play here depending on positioning. Like,
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I just like that it's not going to have those. So if you draw it in your first hand, it's not as strong as it would be later in the game, and I like that.
yeah, agreed.
So that is pretty cool, I guess. Um,
I'll tell you
another.
one that I also like the design of,
Okay, sure.
and it's not about to take everything by storm. I like its design. One season from now is Hypnotic Buzz. Choose
Sure.
one enemy fighter within 2 of one or more friendly fighters and push that chosen fighter 1 hex. So this is a distraction with a range limitation. Uh,
It's distraction but balanced.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly what I'm going for. So I am totally fine with this being in there as a distraction replacement down the line.
Hmm.
Um, that
Yeah.
seems cool.
Yeah. I mean, simple, straightforward. I think that there's not a lot more to say about it. That should still be plenty strong. A push is always good, whether you're trying to use it for positioning or just to get free attacks, pulling
Yeah.
somebody in next to you. So
Yeah, within
Yeah.
2 hexes is obviously much better than adjacent. And we've seen some warbands have, I think, like
Yeah.
if we go back to Gerzags, I think they have one that's pushing adjacent.
Oh, that was
But
an action on an upgrade too. That was awful.
yeah,
uh, and, but there is, it's notable that they chose to make it within 2 rather than within 3, because we talk about this a number of times where you end up with a bunch of objectives within 3 of each other. And so what this means is, unless there's been some uh, token movement, which check back in a second here.
Also
You,
rotates with Beastgrave.
yeah, um, then you are not going to be able to put. Well, if you're staying on an objective, you're not going to be able to push somebody else off their objective unless they've somehow moved.
Yeah,
So
a lot of the situations where you want to use distraction, like get somebody into a lethal for a kill, get somebody off an objective, get somebody onto an objective for lethal ward or something like that. You're still going to be able to use this for. You just can't you're not going to be that Banshee player sitting on the back of the board pushing people around when you're nowhere near them.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
a little bit different.
But
yeah,
talking about moving objectives or feature tokens, somebody want to handle Symbiote's call here?
sure. This is where I was going to go next, just because it's another one that's dealing with pushes. So symbiote's call, you have to choose a feature token within 1 hex of one or more friendly fighters, and then you have to choose either to flip that token or push one friendly fighter 1 hex so that they are in the same hex as that token. Um, so obviously we're going to continue to have some flip tech uh, that can be helpful for denying objective play if we see objective play come back in a big way. Um, for now, it's still viable for Feed the Beastgrave, but I think there's actually enough flip tech now that you probably don't need to go to this card. But I do like the push. It's just a
Here's a question though: how would you guys compare this to Living Land? Because it's a very similar effect. You're either flipping or Living Land is push the token, but this is push a
yeah.
fighter onto the token. So it's very similar. How do you guys compare the two?
Uh,
I think this has better value as a. I am taking it. I care about objectives, and I'm a little worried someone's going to flip them on me because this will help you step onto them or flip them back. Because living land, I think once it's flipped, it can't flip back. I think it's a one way
Yeah, I have to
gate.
choose an objective, not a feature.
Yep.
yeah. Living Land's also a lot more restrictive in which token you can flip. The only ones that can be flipped are the one that match the round number.
Hmm.
So if you're
But you don't
gonna,
have to be near it, so you can flip something
yep.
that's way in somebody
So
else's territory.
you've got the range for it. Also, that one lets you move. The token you can move is also no range restriction, but it has to be in your territory. So there's a lot of interesting play with that card that you can't do with this card. But like you said, Davey, if you just want to make sure you can push onto an objective and are worried that you might need to flip things back, I would definitely say this has some more play. They're
In that
very
sense,
different.
yeah. In that sense, this is a sidestep with a backup,
Yep.
or with with a restriction in exchange for maybe bailing you out. Uh,
Yeah. I
you
still
got
think it's a good card. I just don't know if it's always going to make your 10.
sure.
Yeah.
All right. So we've covered quite a few here. What do we got left? We
We
got
got
4
three
left.
left. Or yeah, four left.
Um what would you like to talk about next, Zach?
Um, I'll go with the most complex one. I'll pick Maddening Drone. Uh, choose one enemy fighter. That fighter's player picks one. So your opponent gets to pick one. Give that fighter one move token, or that fighter is uninspired and cannot be inspired. If they pick the latter, this effect persists until the end of the round, or until that fighter is taken out of action. When this effect ends, the chosen fighter is inspired. Um, Another persist effect for Promise of Destruction, interestingly. If they pick it, I mean, that's down to your opponent picking it.
Sure.
But just in terms of this deck as it works together, the only other two persist effects persist until something happens. Membranous Wings, which we haven't talked about, and Strength of the Swarm. This is the only one that persists till the end of the round. So in that kind of contained, can this work as a deck? It depends on what they pick, but it's there. But as an actual effect, this is clearly designed to kind of counter single fighter leader specific warbands, especially ones that get to 2 shields, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uninspiring Thunderic not only takes a shield away, it takes him down a wound. Uninspiring, I think 2 of the Banshees does the same. It doesn't take away the dodge, but it brings him down a wound. And any Voltron fighter that you're stacking upgrades on doesn't want to get a move token, because then they're stuck there and you get to plink at them with range 2 or shoot them or ignore them, none of which they really want. So I think there's going to be some matchups where this is really powerful. Right now we're looking at the Mollog meta, the Crushes meta, and in both of those, they might just take the uninspire effect, because they don't lose a defense token. They don't lose. I guess Mollog loses 1 damage, but he's stacking great strength and whatever, so probably not going to hurt him that much.
Honestly, you're giving away to inspire, because a lot of times he's struggling a little bit to. People are like,
Yeah.
I'm just not going to attack him, and he's like, okay, fine, I'll take that, and I'll be inspired at the end of the round.
Yep.
That's the other thing, is that against if you get this in round 1 against a lot of enemies, you can't play it, right? Like against warbands that aren't going to have difficult inspire conditions, or can't inspire till the end of the round anyway. What are you going to do? Play them on round 1? They're just going to take the free inspiration off of you. So it's like, it's. I like the design of this because it is kind of a anti-Voltron, shut down that big tanky leader or that guy who's got 7 upgrades on him. But is it good enough to put in the deck? Take acidic strike instead and just kill the upgrades.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I think this is another just tool in the toolbox for that control style where situationally it could end up being game changing. But yeah, it's never like a sure thing, so I don't know if it's going to make the deck either, but it's definitely a great like play space, and the fact that they're starting to do a lot more with trying to add move tokens. See the like litany of nets that we've gotten in Dire Chasm.
Spoiler alert, there's another one here.
Yeah, we'll get there. But yeah, so I like that, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Purely from a background perspective, I do like the quote on this.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
Steelheart is lamenting so many deaths, my deaths. And you got to feel for that guy because he's been around since the start of Shadespire. He's died a lot of times. Certainly, if my games are anything to go by.
Definitely. Well, so we've hit on all the other persisting ploys, so I guess we can talk about the last one here, which is Membranous Wings.
Yeah, thank God. I was worried that we're not going to find a way to get people faster in this.
Yeah, you know,
I was really feeling light on +2 move cards.
for sure. So if you didn't feel like you could go fast enough yet, here you go. Here's your card. So +2 move to the next friendly fighter to make a charge action. So it is limited. You can't just use it for a move, which is nice. Although a lot of the move scoring cards right now do require a charge anyway. So most of the time, I don't think you care. But this effect does persist until the next friendly fighter's charge. So if for some reason you weren't ready to charge yet, but you still wanted to play a card, you could.
Let me ask this, and I should probably, there may be something about this. Does this go over an end phase? I know there's something about end phase clears things out.
I believe the end phase clears all persisting effects.
I thought it did
have to
too,
go
even if
there.
it doesn't say. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, I think at the end phase, everything gets cleared. Everything.
But interestingly, if you want to score Promise of Destruction, you can just play this in the final power step, or just play it and not charge and have it persist and
Sure.
be there. So it is kind of another tool.
Yeah. And having that synergy within this sort of pre-constructed deck is nice, that they actually do have some of these that play well together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you may look at this once some stuff rotates out. I mean, there's plenty of stuff in Dire Chasm, but we'll see tracking and Spectral Wings slide out of the.
Is Malkin Grace Dire Chasm, or is that Beastgrave?
I think it's also Beastgrave. It was late Beastgrave.
Yeah, I think
Pretty
that was
sure.
like Morgwaith's or something like that.
Yeah. All right. So we got 2 left. We got Spirit Comb and maybe
I
we
think
just
just
I
have
think that's
Spirit
it.
Comb?
I think
Just
it's it.
Spirit Comb.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to talk about this one, Davey?
Yeah. So it is choose one friendly fighter, heal 1 that fighter, or heal 2 if that fighter has 3 or more upgrades. My first take was like, I don't care. But if you are building that Voltron build, you are almost certainly going to have your 3, and heal 2's pretty juicy. I don't know if it has space for it. We're recording this after some other people have released some reviews, and I think some other people are hotter on it than I am. So I don't know if I'm missing something here, but
I mean, it compares closely to Healing Potion, right? Because it's heal 1 or heal 2, and
Sure.
that one is like a 50-50. This one is only situationally you heal 2. But really, they both pale in comparison to the elephant in the room, which is Ferocious Resistance.
sure. I mean, I guess Ferocious Resistance, you're expecting to heal 2. You'd have to have 4 damage on you before you're really expecting to heal 2, presuming that hunger's not involved.
True.
Although it can, has spikes in either direction. So that is,
I
I mean, that's on the higher end.
It depends on whether you want to roll dice or you want the consistency, but not the spikes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of where it falls.
I would think that if you're playing Hrothgorn or Mollog and you're Voltroning, you probably really like this. Like, knowing for sure that in round 3 or round 2 that you can have a way to pull 2 wound tokens off of you is probably pretty good feeling.
Mhm.
And if they restrict ferocious resistance, I mean, that kind of answers the question for us. I think this becomes very, very common
Yeah.
in that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, as with most healing tech, you basically don't play it unless you've got a big fighter. But if you get a big fighter, you really like this.
Sure, yeah.
Or I guess if you're playing Ilthari's Guardians and you want a way to inspire for free.
Sure.
Yeah, man, poor Guardians.
Rip.
Just sad every time I think about them.
All right. But that's all of our gambits. On to some upgrades. I mean, maybe not spoiling anything here, but I do feel like we got the best stuff sort of last year. I feel like there's a lot of really strong upgrades here, so it should be fun to dig into these. Again, quick stats: there are 3 weapon upgrades. There's 2 silent relics in here, so now we're up to 4 silent relics. So all of a sudden, they're just everywhere, and we have 2 things that reward you for stacking upgrades. So Voltroning is still very much popular in Dire Chasm. So sort of being that they are the bells of the ball, if you will, should we start with these silent relics?
Sure.
Sure.
All right. So I think I'll start with the one that I think is the stronger of the 2, and that is the Silent Ring. So the Silent Ring is so like all the other Silent Relics. This will make you a quarry, and if you're a quarry, you have the following reaction, which is that after this fighter's activation, if you have 3 or fewer power cards, and I think that's pretty important, 3 or fewer, not fewer than 3, but 3 or fewer, you can then draw a power card.
That's so strong.
It is
Yeah.
very strong. I will pose it to. Okay, so then I guess also if you're stacking, you get +1 dice to your range 1 attack actions, but I don't think anyone's taking this for that. That's just a nice side benefit. I will pose it to both of you. Do you think that Silent Ring now takes the place of Crown of the Dead?
Well, it's net the same, right? Because you're either drawing 2, discarding 1, or you're drawing 1. This has less of... It has like both more and less of a restriction because you don't have to spend glory to do it. And you don't have to discard to do it. I think it really depends on what happens with silent relics, because a big downside of the Mortis relics is that you've got one of them is restricted. None of these are restricted so far. We don't know if silent relics are going to get a payoff card like we get with Avatar or any of the other stacking ones. Mortis relics were kind of interesting in that they didn't have a payoff card, like a payoff objective or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If we get one for silent, like that kind of answers the question for me at least. Where it's like, oh, you stack all these and you get these good effects, and in the third end phase you get 3 glory for having 4 or more on you. So I think it really depends on what goes in the future, but right now it's a bit of a toss-up. I mean, yeah, I think you got to take that as to what your fighter is trying to do.
Mm-hmm. The armor, on the other hand, as a react after move action, remove all guard tokens from enemy fighters adjacent to this fighter, and then its stacking abilities +1 wounds if the fighter has 2 or more silent relics. Because a lot of people are getting guard from things like dominant defender, or things that don't actually give a guard token. There's some out there that do,
or just Glazette existing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This wasn't quite as good as I first thought, because like, oh, this is amazing. Like you finally just like stop having to worry about that and throw people in that lethal that they think they're safe from. But not so much. But I think you're maybe bringing it along anyway for the stacking. And again, if you're looking for the payoff, here's a question for you though. As far as stacking, Silent Helm required 3 or more silent relics. Every other silent relic just required 2. What is going on there?
I think it's just because Silent Helm is stronger. I think it's
yeah.
So Silent Helm if you look at these two, like Armor has a mediocre reaction and a good stacking effect. Ring has a good reaction and kind of an okay stacking effect because most people who are stacking are not range 1.
Mm.
And especially because a lot of these are defensive tools.
Right.
+1 dice is kind of aggro, so it's kind of against it. But both the reaction and the stacking effect for armor, or helm rather, are both very good. And I think that's why it's 3, just because it's the better of the ones we've seen so far.
Fair. Yeah, I saw these and I thought, well, I wondered if I was imagining the 3 on the helm, but yeah, had to go check.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, so I think if you're gonna, I don't know, if you're taking the sword, which was from the Mad Mob, the sword sort of works well with the ring, in that if you have both, you're now going to have a 4 hammer 2 damage attack that in no man's land goes to 3 damage and has ensnare. So I mean, that seems pretty strong to me, but again, that sort of depends on, are you going to be taking that sword? So I don't know. I still think the silent relics seem good. And like you say, if we get a payoff for actually equipping these things beyond just their effects, I think we'll see them a lot.
Yeah. And, comparing them to other stacking, avatar cards, very aggro focused. The Mortis Relic's kind of half and half. You get the +1 wound, you get the draw cards, but it's also +1 damage and pushing and stuff like that. These are, other than the sword, these are pretty defensive focused. Helm lets you reroll dice and reduces crits. You get +1 wound on the armor. The draw is not defensive, but it is kind of like control-y on the ring. So it's like, they've gone a more defensive focus for it, which I kind of like, in that it's you're not going to stack all these and then be like, oh cool, my Mollog or my Hrothgorn or my Krusha is just going around punching people in the throat. It's
right.
Well, they might do that.
It's a little bit of a different play style.
Sure. Yeah.
For sure.
And it may play in like I keep talking about the quarry deck. If you're leaning into stuff like that, so you can stack up on somebody, or if you need to, spread them around a little bit to get some more quarries, or get quarry where you need it. So
yeah, it's been a nice payoff for my silent, or for my Starblood Stalkers. So I like that.
Yeah. I don't. Speaking of a card that makes you a quarry, I don't always understand why certain cards make you a quarry. So Augmented Limbs is here. Makes you a quarry.
Yeah,
if this fighter is a quarry, this fighter's range 1 attack actions have +1 dice. I mean, that's pretty solid. That's right there competing with not Predatory Instinct.
Strength of Terror.
Strength of Terror.
Like the exact same card, right?
Except it doesn't work on range 2.
Yeah, Strength of Terror is range 2.
Still.
So I wonder if that's enough that keeps this from getting restricted, because the range 2 is a big deal.
It is.
So
it's interesting you say that about the quarry, because I was thinking about this the other day, and the only reason, because they all say if this fighter is a quarry, you get X, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like, it's balanced around, if your opponent stops making you a quarry, then you lose all these effects. But how many cards turn off quarry? I feel like there's
like
almost one bad one.
Yeah, and they're usually ones you would apply. I think there's like upgrades, right?
Yeah.
So
like this fighter is not a quarry and cannot be a quarry. Like, sometimes there's stuff like that, but weird.
Yeah. But right, here's the Harvester getting spiky arms, I guess. So.
Sure. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Just be even scarier when you're spinning around.
Not a lot to say about that. I think it's fine. I think some warbands are happy to see that, because they were, Reavers. I guess I've been running some of them, and then other than Karsus, Strength of Terror is a little bit wasted as far as, I still take it, but here you could switch to this, and most of the time you'd be totally happy with it.
Yeah.
Unless you bring in spears, which is not a bad idea either. Speaking of spears.
Sure. We can talk about the Kite and Spear.
Yeah, another weapon type.
Yeah.
Who predicted?
Yeah. Nobody. I mean, we already have so much. But yeah, so we got two of these chitin weapons. So we'll talk about the spear first. So as normal, it's a spear. So it's reach 2, 2 hammers, 2 damage, because evidently that's what a spear is. And if you roll no successes in this attack, you can re-roll one of the dice. Just sort of an interesting, balanced way of getting re-rolls, because they keep seeming to try and add like a thing on that lets you get some sort of benefit, but not trying to have it be super strong. So, like, I guess,
So, well, what do you guys think of the chitin effect? Because, without spoiling too much about the scimitar, it's got the same reroll if you have no successes. So you compare that to Soul Tooth, which is reroll if they have a move or charge token, Guardian Glaive, which is reroll if you're holding an objective. This is reroll if you miss entirely.
Yeah.
Do you take multiple? Do you take one? Which one do you think is best?
Yeah, my gut instinct on this particular effect is that it's just going to extend my heartbreak. Oh, I got nothing. Oh, then I got nothing again.
Nothing.
Or re-roll into like a single success. And a lot of times the things that I'm really wanting the accuracy boost on are somebody who is doing something like Glissette. And if you're only throwing one success at her, she's probably just going to tank it. It's modest. It's good enough, I guess. The scimitar is 2 damage, range 1, 3 fury with cleave, and cleave is usually a little more attractive on something that's hitting on smash, because you're already doing a lot of your work with that with the 3 fury attack. Crits are kind of getting you through a lot of the time rather than the normal successes. But I think my instinct is I'm usually going with a different weapon.
I would agree.
Yeah, 3 sword with cleave is like pretty reliable, but you can get 3 sword or 3 hammer 2 damage off of like Amberbone sword or something like that. So,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, so we talked about the other 2 weapons. We might as well finish up with the snare here. We got our net. So this one is 3 swords for 1 damage at range 3. And if it succeeds, you can give the target 1 move token, and then, as normal with the nets, you then have to discard it. So it's pretty accurate, and it has the 3 range, so you can hit it from decent ways off. I think it's a pretty good net. I think, obviously, barbed net giving a charge token was very strong, but the 2 reach meant that there was a lot of situations where if you missed, you're probably dead coming out of it. So this is a little safer, and could still shut somebody down the same amount, because if they can't get into range to make an attack, they effectively have a charge token anyway, unless you're Moloch. I don't know. Any other thoughts on this one?
It's pretty nice that you can keep trying until you hit, right?
Yeah, that's good.
It doesn't go until you land the hit. I think the range 3 is a real big deal, and I think if you're doing that sort of control build, I talked a little bit in the last episode, which neither of you were there for, but talked about even if you're not a pure standoff, like sometimes you're just trying to do something like lock down that one fighter that's pretty bulky. Like if you lock down one of the crushes, then the output goes pretty far down unless they can really push and surf around a little bit.
Especially if you take down Morgok himself.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you're playing against Starblood, if you can pin Clacktrock in place while you go tear apart Skinks, that can buy you a lot of time. So this is always the kind of I remember, even back to, if we're talking about Guardians again, didn't Elthari had a spell, right? There was a Cage of Thorns or something like that.
Yep. Just give a move token.
Yeah, it was always a spell that I would see and I'd be like, I want to build a deck with that, and then I try, and then I'm like, never mind. This is hard.
Storm of Cells just has a weapon upgrade that's gives a move token you don't discard. You could kind of double up on these if you wanted to, and something like that especially because that warband loses their shooting after the first one.
Oh yeah, good call. Right.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking that this has some synergy with Profiteers. They have Headshot, which is crit, and this rolls 3 dice.
Mhm.
So you're getting you put it on Allenson, his gun is garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You give him this. Now he's got 3 sword. It gives a move token. You can score Headshot off it. You could potentially, even throw it on Thundrick, give him Eagle Eye, which gives him the reroll and stuff. Like, if you're running a lot of range 3 stuff, like your range 3 warband, or you're running like other upgrades and stuff, there's some synergies out there that can make this really reliable.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that all 3 of the nets. I mean, it seems crazy that we have 3 of them, but I like that they all have they all have reasons that you would take this or not. Like maybe you're not a hunter, so then barbed laden nets off the table, and you look at the other ones, or so it feels like there's a lot of overlap with them, but I think there's distinct reasons you take one or the other. It's kind of cool.
I agree.
Definitely. All right. So we kind of have 3 that all deal with stacking upgrades in a sense, and then 1 here that's for healing. So I guess let's get the healing one out of the way. So that's Regenerative Cycle. So this is a reaction where after the fighter's activation, you can discard 1 or more power cards and heal X, where X is the number of power cards you discarded. So on first reading, my thought was, why would you ever want to do this? Like, that's a huge cost.
It's a bad card. Don't have to beat around the bush.
But then when I thought about it some more, I was like, okay, well, if you're going to lose Mollog and the choice is ditch your power hand or die, you ditch your power hand. So, like, it's incredibly situational.
That's true. It is consistent, right? Like, you could, especially if you're running draw cards, like, imagine running this alongside Crown of the Dead, or Silent Ring. You're drawing cards every activation. You've got, Duel of Wits, because everyone's running Duel of Wits.
Yep.
And, you're like, oh, like you said, very last moment, you have this on, and I'm just going to dump 6 power cards, heal back to full, and it's like, yeah, I'm still Mollog, I can still punch things, but
yeah,
I don't know. It just feels like that's so situational, and why wouldn't you take cards that prevent damage or mitigate damage instead?
Right.
I don't disagree, and that's sort of where I ended up. Is like, yeah, you could have this situationally clutch reaction, but I think more often than not, you just play better upgrades, and then you don't need that clutch situation to begin with.
Another one I think is not very good is Collector.
Yep.
This is reaction after your activation, in which you make an attack action. It takes an adjacent enemy fighter out of action. Give this fighter an upgrade from your hand. This means you had to spend a glory to put this on. So the first upgrade you get is no net bonus, right? Like,
yep.
You could have already had that down if you just put that other one down. It has to be adjacent, has to be from an attack action. Just pretty rough. There's too many restrictions. Too slow a card. Do not recommend.
Yeah.
This is for the absolute madman who's running a 15 upgrade 5 ploy deck, and is just like burning through upgrades as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it feels like there's a few things they've been toying with where they want to try and find ways of getting upgrades out without paying the cost for playing the upgrades. And well, that's interesting because it's like, hey, now you don't need that starter glory to get your upgrades out. I feel like in most games, especially now, you tend to have a surplus of glory by the mid to end of the game anyway. So why do you need this to get your upgrades out when you know you're going to have enough glory to get your upgrades out? So
I mean, the idea is sound, because if you think in the past to effects, so like now we have forward planning, which is charge token and you get an upgrade. In the past we had what was the Shadespire one that you just got an upgrade?
It was Spoils of Battle.
Thank you. So this is like, if you think about it like, oh, if I equip 3 upgrades with this, it's like using one of those ploy cards 3 times. And for a
Mm,
value perspective, that seems very good. But like you said, there's a lot of glory. Maybe you combo this with a lot of the Arena Mortis stuff, which requires you to spend glory. So you're
mm,
like, oh, I'm equipping my upgrades for free. Now I'm using my Mortis relics to push. Now I'm
mm.
using these cards that are like spend 2 glory, get 2 extra damage. I've
Sure.
got the extra glory,
Yeah.
but is it really worth it? And you need to get it out in that order too, right? Like drawing this in the final power hand is like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's dead.
it's bad. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a version of this card that is maybe it would be less thematic, but is maybe more attractive that doesn't require you to be adjacent and succeed in attack action and take them out of action.
Yep.
If it
Yes,
was,
exactly.
if it was like after activation sort of thing, or whatever the case may be, then also you're like, okay, yeah, you could passively power somebody up in the back
Hmm.
if you can have them go again and again. But
In,
that's not
in
this card.
in that idea, it's kind of like a trophy belt, except it doesn't give you the glory at the end of the game, right?
Sure,
Because trophy
right.
Mhm.
belt gives you glory that you can spend on stuff, but it's not really the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And if they're going to err one way or the other with this kind of card, it's better if they err too conservative because
Yep.
if you make this
Oh,
kind of
sure.
card too
Yeah.
good, it is insane. So,
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Especially when we're already rewarding stacking upgrades,
sure.
like
Yes,
these
thank
next
you.
two cards.
Yeah,
True.
soldiers, savage soldier and swift soldier.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just run through them real quick. So there's Savage Soldier, uh, does nothing by itself, but with 2 or more upgrades, you get +1 dice to range 1. With 4 more upgrades, you get Cleave and Ensnare. Swift Soldier is the same, nothing at first, but at 2 plus you get +1 move, and at 4 plus you get 2 plus move. Um, I think Swift Soldier is bad. I mean, how many people are just running great speed by itself?
Right.
Yeah.
+2 move is nice, but there's so many like we said, there's just so many ploys that give it. There's Savage Speed that gives it. There's
Hmm.
faction. There's I can think of at least 3 factions that have +2 move just
Yeah.
in their faction. So it's kind of that one's kind of whatever. But Savage Soldier is like it's worthy of consideration. Like we said with Augmented Limbs, range 1 restriction means that there's first of all you can't even use it on the stalkers that are on the picture here because it's got a Glaive Wraith stalker
Love
on
it.
it, and they got range 2. So cool stuff there.
Maybe he's ignoring the 2+. He's just going straight to the 4+. So,
Yeah, but that's the big thing, right? You get
yeah.
4 and Cleave and Snare on all your attacks. That's really good. You're
Yeah.
to the point where your opponent is fishing for crits, and that's never a bad thing.
Mhm.
Um, is
For
it
sure.
worth is it worth waiting until you've got 4 upgrades to slap this on and get that when it's basically dead in round 1? Because you can run this on Mollog and just ignore the 2 plus and just go for the Cleave and Snare, and Mollog with Cleave and Snare is pretty sick.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
but I don't know if it makes the cut over things that give immediate benefits.
I will
Yeah.
say with Mollog, depending on the matchup, the +1 dice is still nice because he can scything with more dice, which is scary.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Um, I think somebody like Morgok or Hrothgorn actually really like this a lot.
Don't they both have Cleave innately though?
Inspired, I
Inspired,
think
but by the time you're
so.
getting to
But
4,
yeah,
you're
I mean,
probably
hopefully
Yeah.
you're
inspired.
inspired. But
Yeah.
even if this was just +1 dice and ensnare, I'd still think that was good.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Interestingly, because the Cleave and Ensnare portion does not have a range restriction, you can slap it on Stormsire and just be turning off his range
yeah,
3
yeah,
attack with Cleave and Ensnare.
Oof.
pretty scary stuff. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we don't expect to see this everywhere, but it could come up, and it could be pretty scary if it suddenly starts to get that snowball rolling. And
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess It never used to feel like stacking upgrades made a ton of sense because it was like, well, you could just put a few bonuses across your whole warband and make everybody scary. But then it got to the point where I can have one fighter who never dies and then becomes like a 9 dice, 5 damage crazy monster. And so,
Yeah, Voltroning is like really interesting because from a design standpoint, it doesn't feel problematic when you're just talking about 3 wound fighters, 4 wound fighters who only have one defense baseline.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Everybody,
fine.
yeah, everybody thinks it's cool when Karsus Voltrons.
Yeah.
yeah, yep, because it is.
Yeah.
Or even like, you throw it on, even on Morgok, like, okay, he's 5 wounds, but, he's move 3 and he's range 1. He's not doing all this crazy stuff that some of the other fighters we talk about are. I don't know. It feels like these cards really go towards the design that is currently dominating the meta.
Mhm.
And if they were released in another season, if these were released in Beastgrave, middle of Nightvault, well, Nightvault had tome stacking, which was its own thing. But yeah, if these were released in Beastgrave, where it was kind of like decentralized, people were doing weapons, people were holding objectives, like these would seem like really interesting, but not oppressive cards. But I can, like you said, can already see Savage Soldier being in specific decks and just cumulatively, multiplicatively powering those decks up so much.
Sure.
Well, I think, unless I missed anything, I think we hit all of them.
We
I think
did.
that's all of them.
So the question then is, how do all of these cards work together if you were to try and play them as a deck? I guess I know I have sort of, after reading through all of them again, I know where I come down, and I'm curious what you guys think.
I think there is a specific type of warband that could play this right out of the box. I think we mentioned it a little bit during the objective side, as it alluded to, like Untouchable Swarm and Advancing Swarm. But the tanky, semi-tanky 4 or 5 man warbands, I think can take this and run with it. You're not going to win a clash. You might
Yeah.
not even win local class, but I think you can take it to a Friday night Underworlds or whatever you have around you and do okay.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of warbands that are just going to fail with it. I mean, if you're a range 2 or range 3 warband, a lot of these cards are dead for you. If you're
Yeah.
a 3 fighter warband, a lot of these cards are dead for you. But yeah, I mean, if you fall specifically into the niche that this is trying to fill, you could do worse.
Yeah. I think it feels relatively comparable to some of the factions starter decks that are in there. Some are a lot stronger and some are on this level. I think it's mostly hampered by its objectives. There's a cluster of them that are real situational or real. You're only going to have a couple opportunities to score them in the whole game, if at all. I think you'll have a lot of dead draws in your objective deck, which is the main thing that'll hang you up. I think the power deck is fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that the strikes, all 3 being in this deck, is like, that is the biggest weakness of it, because
Yeah.
having one of these in a deck by itself would not be a problem. But I mean, if you're a new player and you play this straight out of the box, you're going to feel like search cards are garbage.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
that's what they're trying to instill. They want people
Yeah.
to be like, "Oh man, those surge cards are so bad."
Yeah. I will say I really like the idea of this. I thought it was a really cool thing to try. I think it's got to be incredibly challenging. You think of like a pre-built deck with something like a collectible card game like Magic. Like you don't have to marry it up to a warband.
Yeah.
Here they pre-build something, and they were never going to be able to pre-build a deck that works with every warband, right?
Definitely.
Not that I can imagine. And then they're also trying to serve the purpose of creating cards that people are interested in outside of this pre-built deck. Um, but I thought it was cool. I like that it had some theme. I almost would have liked to see like a more, like any of these cards, the art is cool. I would have
Mhm.
liked to see some more of this leaning into the like the weird, starting to look like the silent people, like augmented limbs.
Yeah.
The I'm not exactly sure what's going on in Hypnotic Buzz, but like really get a theme of like, hey, if you're running this deck, your guys are turning into like weird insectoid stuff. Having more that would have been kind of a fun art direction to take for a pre-built deck, and
Mhm.
if they come back to it again, I think that'd be a cool thing to try to showcase with that. I, I'm not sure at what point it came together as, hey, we're gonna make this a pre-built deck. If that was like the original intent, or if it was we're gonna do a card pack, and what
Mhm.
if we can take some of the cards that we've already made for this season and coalesce them roughly thematically. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I like you said, I like the idea. Um, I hope that they come back to it. I think having card packs that are billed as you can take this off the rack and just play it as is and you're good to go. You don't have to think about building your first deck. You can just go out of the box. Um, I think that's really strong for new players. Um, and so I hope we see it again.
I think it would be, not to interrupt too much. I just think it would be interesting if they had themed it around a play style. Like this
Mm.
feels like it's
Yeah.
themed around an idea, but if they were like, "Hey, here's an aggro deck," and every card is aggro themed. There's none of these like defensive cards. There's none of these weird like disruption type cards, acidic strike, hypnotic buzz. Like everything is just around killing your opponent.
Mm.
And even if some of them are bad, it has to be at least a little bit bad because you don't want the pre-built one to be metagame.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, but even if it was just like half of it was bad, but it was themed to a specific play style, like I feel like that would have been really a lot more interesting, especially for a new player. You're like, oh hey, I just went on bought Grimwatch. Is there a way that I can get an easy hold objective deck? And you're just like, yeah, buy that one off the shelf. It'll be a good starting point. I think that would be if they continue to do this in the future. I think that might be kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be a cool thing to do with essential packs going forward. But
Mm.
that's just an idea off off the top of my head. But I mean, it'd be cool because like then you could have these three pre-built decks that are permanently existing that would always be available to say, hey, if you're interested in this playstyle, pick this card deck up when you start out the game, along with whatever else you bought to start the game to get your boards and dice and tokens and all that. And then you're off to the races. So
Yeah, totally.
I think we did it. We did the thing. Any final thoughts before we bring it home?
I think I'm good. I think we hashed it out.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from this pack is just I'm excited to see what more they do with Silent Relics. I think it, like I said, I think a few times in here, just because I've been thinking about it. But you compare it to previous stacking things. I think the Silent Relics are relatively well designed, and I can't wait to see. I think we've got, given the naming convention, I think there's at least one or two left. Someone was mentioning that in the Discord. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so I'm looking forward to that going forward.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for this episode today. If you'd like to reach out to us to comment about anything we talked about today, or if you'd just like to get in touch with us at all, you can reach us at WTHcast on Twitter or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to check out any of our other content, you can head over to themortalrealms.com. We've got all of the episodes of our show as well as the other shows in the Mortal Realms podcast group, which is the Story Phase and Dogs of Warcry. And if you're interested in supporting our podcast group, feel free to jump into Patreon. And we do have some t-shirts available if you would like there. But obviously, if you feel so inclined, that would be wonderful. But otherwise, absolutely no pressure. Thanks for listening as always. Coming up, we do have still quite a few things kind of going right now. David, do you have a sense of what is probably coming next?
We'll just keep you guessing.
Yeah,
R.I.P. Keep them guessing.
always. What is our recommended listening for today, Davey?
Oh, right. This is by the band The Knife. It's from Silent Shout, and we share our mother's health.
All right. Well, that for What the Hex. I've been Phil.
I've been Davey.
And I'm Zach.
I mean, it's up to GW at this rate. They're probably about to drop like OBR on us tomorrow or something like that. And like, oh god, Bone Reapers. Boosh. Okay. I was hitting something weird the last time I was trying to do this, and every time I hit record, it would like dump us out the first few times. I don't know if I was like fat fingering it and sending myself hitting back or what, but yeah, exactly. So Zach, how do you want to be referred to in this episode? Do you want to be
Zach's fine. Yeah, okay. Zach's fine.
How do I say your screen? Requisite?
Yeah, Requisite.
Okay.